Secretariat with Satali will, and the regional and also the regional leads, and welcome. I haven't actually met that many of you, but welcome on board. We'll coordinate the prep activities, and these are hugely important. Without effective preparation, the meeting is pretty meaningless. And secondly, you can also get a hell of a lot out of the preparation, even without the meeting, to be honest. And these activities are designed to include engagement with the participating ministers, support the development of case studies, and help prepare a compelling narrative. So it's to ensure that the finance minister and in some cases his or her sector minister are fully prepared to actually engage in the dialogue, which is the heart of the meeting. So I talked a bit about case studies and themes. So here we are. So there will be a maximum of 4 themes to the meeting. The number which will be used in the actual meeting will be also determined by the time and the quality of the case studies that we have. But these are the 4 themes. The first focuses on planning, a planning and financing strategy, how that is constructed. What does a good one look like? What lessons can we learn from that? Drawing on experience from the most recent GLASS TRACFIN assessments, and also maybe bringing aspects of climate adaptation and climate finance as well. The second theme, which is very much mutually supportive to the first, is on sector performance and how that can be improved, drawing on particular experience relating to tariffs, efficiencies, and borrowing. And we have a number of candidate countries involved, and there's 2 from Africa mentioned, Uganda and Kenya, but we would hope candidate countries from which these case studies can be drawn would include 1 or 2 in Asia as well. The third theme is specific to sanitation. And this would be about different forms of sanitation finance and how to mobilize that. And there's a couple of examples given here. Incentive-based financing, where the actual, in terms of sanitation, we look at this from a circular economy and look at opportunities to mobilize the, for example, the fact that sanitation byproducts have a value. And there's a possibility, for example, of Sanaji's model, which is focused on that in the slums of Kenya, could be one that would form a case study, but there should be others. We know there are others out there. Or alternatively, new methods of financing like output-based aid. So candidate countries include now Sri Lanka. I'm not sure if there's anyone from Sri Lanka on this call, Kenya and others. And the last one, climate financing, as a potential source of a hell of a lot of additional finance, which at the moment we understand that the sector finds difficult to access. Now, these are 4 main themes. If time is restricted, we might have to cut this down, because what we don't want to do is undermine the quality of the discussion, which is one of the most important opportunities provided by this meeting. So in the next slide on constraints, I make that point. If time or material is limited, when I say material, let's say we don't get a decent case study, the number of themes may have to be reduced from 4 to 3 or even to 2. But in this case, it's more likely that we'd focus on either the first or the second theme, and we might be able to bring in aspects of sanitation finance or climate finance to strengthen those 2 leading themes. The situation will become clearer when we achieve the kind of final agreement with the World Bank on the time available. We can discuss that after this presentation if you want. But we are asking for 2 hours. Okay, the format of the meeting, we'll just talk about this briefly. Obviously, we're going to have opening remarks from dignitaries, and we have ambition here. So we're going to be requesting the World Bank President, the UN Secretary General, And certainly we would expect Kevin Rudd to be there as well in some sort of opening kind of celebration. But this will not take very much time. Because the meeting is going to be focused on the quality of the dialogue between finance ministers and others in the room, and also between finance ministers themselves, we propose using an experienced anchor who is used to dealing with these formidable characters and communicators and kind of marshalling the conversation and encouraging everyone to participate. So there's a few names there that you may or may not recognize, and there might be others we could add as well. But these are individuals who are professional and are well used to doing exactly this. So an anchor. And finally, the final slide before I hand over is about the format of the meeting. So assuming we have 2 hours available for the meeting and allowing a maximum of 10 minutes for opening remarks and a 5-minute opening video, we think we can present up the 4 topics that I've mentioned. The number, however, is a maximum, because the most important thing is to be able to present and discuss compelling evidence and maximize opportunities for peer-to-peer dialogue. And each discussion, or each theme, if you like, and we've talked about the case studies, would comprise a short, maybe 5-minute TED talk on the topic delivered by the selected finance minister or finance minister with his or her sector minister, followed by dialogue. It says Q&A here, but that's not really the best word for it. A dialogue with the participating finance ministers and SWA partners. So in the room and participating would be the leading representatives of CSO, research and learning, and also the private sector, not mentioned here, but the private sector would also be in the meeting and participating in the dialogue. Although the main opportunity really needs to be given to finance ministers to lead that and participate in that discussion. So those are the 10 slides from me. I'm now going to hand over to Sitali, I think, who will continue.
Thank you so much, Paul. That was very comprehensive. Thanks for that. So the part that I will present will focus mostly on the preparatory process. As Paul has said, in the preparatory process, the Secretariat will help mobilize partners, will help coordinate the process with the main intention of getting the right information to the sector and finance ministers. We are aware that this meeting is for finance ministers, but we do encourage some prior discussions before the meeting between the sector and finance ministers in country. So part of the purpose of the preparatory process is to help inform the sector and finance ministers so that they could have relevant discussions that can already lead to concrete results at country level, for example, through linking with the national budgeting process and through linking with other financing opportunities. And then secondly, a key component of the preparatory process is to mobilize partners so they could contribute to the analysis, but also contribute to their own processes for contributing towards financing the sector. This could be done through the commitments that partners take, or through the additional opportunities that they would see to raise and channel the resources effectively to the sector. So here we present a series of the activities that are being proposed, and we will show slightly later the types of support that will be available from the global level, and also what we're hoping could be happening at country level. So the first activity for the preparatory process is the launch of the prep process itself, and that means the same webinar that you are attending now. And this will be followed by bilateral conversations that we hope to organize with different country teams starting December, going all the way even up to the meeting. We will have 2 moments where we will do an emphasis or do an outreach for these bilateral conversations. The first will be in the first 2 weeks of December, so that we could at least have a preliminary conversation with each of the country teams ahead of before the end of the year. And then secondly, we also hope that our colleagues in various countries and regions could already start the preparations immediately after this webinar, in terms of thinking of 2 to 3 things. One is, what are the processes that exist now in country that could be used to support the preparatory process? We understand there might be countries that will already be doing a joint sector review, or there might be a coordination meeting before the end of the year, or any other sector working group meeting or meetings like that. We would like to encourage partners to use those opportunities to put on the agenda the preparations for the finance ministers meeting, and also to strategize on how to reach out to the finance ministry in order to secure the participation of the finance minister. So while we're doing the webinar today, this is also in fact the trigger of the country preparatory process, which is obviously going to lead to those discussions with the countries. The second is that we will send save the date letters. These will be sent from the SWA chair's desk. That's Kevin Rudd. We will send it on his behalf. So we've asked countries to send us the details of the Minister of Finance, as well as the sector ministers who should be copied in that correspondence. Third, we also already circulated a template for the case studies. So we issued a call for countries that would be interested to submit a case study. This template was sent, I believe, last week, and if you haven't received it, let us know. If you haven't received it last week or this week, let us know, and we'll send that template. It's just a simple one-page document that we're using to collect the interest of countries that would like to present case studies. As Paul has indicated, the space is limited, and so we're hoping that we can get these submissions of really good quality, and the deadline is December 13. So in slightly more than 2 weeks from now, we hope that we can receive that one pager by that time. And then I have already said that we'll do the bilateral discussions in December. So please do let us know when your country team might be available to have a conversation with the regional coordinator and other partners also supporting the preparatory process. When we get to the new year, when we get into 2020, we'll do webinar number 2, somewhere after the 15th of January. It might be in the 3rd week of January. That information will come in a guidance document. So the topic of that webinar will also be announced. The idea here is that we would like to see how the content of the briefing note that Paul has said looks like. He's already indicated we have an outline, and so we should be able to indicate the topic of this webinar in due course, perhaps before the end of the year or early in January. But do plan for this second webinar in January. So and that around that time in January, we will also share a guidance document. This guidance document is similar to what we've shared in the past. It just provides more information about the meeting. A synthesized version of the concept note will also be in there. We will also send it at the same time with the briefing note, and we will in there make the suggestions of the types of activities that partners can do. Obviously, that is not to limit what partners can do, but it is just to offer, also with experience of previous meetings, some of the ideas of what partners can do in the run-up to the meeting. And then in February, we also would do the second effort in terms of an outreach for the bilateral discussions. And at this point, we hope to discuss a lot more we hope to use the briefing note that will have been prepared at the global level, and how that can be used at national level, and how national briefings for the sector and finance ministers will be developing at that point. In March, we will do webinar number 3. Again, the topic will be announced, and at this point, we're also recommending that partners at country level could also be doing public events to engage with the multi-stakeholder forums that they have, but also to engage with such bodies as parliamentarians, to engage the media. And I think it would also be good for partners to take advantage of the World Water Day to strengthen some of these messages so that they could be more aligned and using multiple opportunities. In April, very early in April, there will be webinar number 4. This will be the 4th and final webinar before the finance ministers meeting. At this point, we'll be sharing more specific details about the meeting, how the agenda will be looking like, which countries will have the chance to speak, and etc. We'll be talking there at that point, more or less final. We'll be putting final touches on the meeting itself, and then the finance ministers meeting happens in April. After that, about a month after that, we'll do webinar number 5, which will focus on the outcomes of the meeting and the follow-up to the meeting, how then partners could use the post-meeting processes to reinforce discussions. On this slide, we are showing the types of activities that we propose that can happen at country level. This is not to limit what can happen, but this is just to put forward some suggestions. So we think that the core of these discussions should be around the multi-stakeholder dialogue, which would involve all the different types of actors, the external support agencies, that is the bilateral and multilateral donors, the UN agencies, also development banks. We also would hope that these multi-stakeholder dialogues would involve the civil society, the private sector, the research and learning agencies. Ideally, for countries that already have a process around a joint sector review, a multi-stakeholder engagement, those are processes that we hope can be used to have further discussions. And we think that these discussions can happen in phases. The first discussion focusing more or less on the concept and how the country can prepare a briefing for their ministers, and then finding the analysis and details and information that will be required to go into that briefing, obviously also benefiting from the global briefing that would be produced, and then preparing that information. The second level of those discussions could also focus on when the meetings can happen with the ministers, so exactly when the briefing gets to happen, and how to go about getting those meetings both for the sector as well as the finance minister. We would like to propose that there should be a ministerial briefing note, so that each country could prepare really a short document, maybe 2 to 3 pages, that draws from the global briefing note, but contextualized, so that this can be used for discussions between the sector and finance minister. We're trying to be careful that the ministers should be informed enough to get to the meeting so that they could participate effectively. But also we hope that this cannot overcook the process, so that finance ministers feel that, well, they've heard everything and therefore they cannot they do not find then the bigger meeting more useful. So we just try and strike that right balance of information before the meeting to trigger their appetite, but also to already begin to get some action, but also to let them know that there will be more that they can get from the main meeting as well. We would like to encourage partners to do some national and local level advocacy between now and the meeting, and as I had indicated, the World Water Day is one good opportunity, but then partners can create their own opportunities that work and help in this regard. I recall that when we were talking about the mutual accountability mechanism in Pakistan, we at SACOSAN we had the minister who came to open that discussion. She really emphasized engagement with the media. This is not to say that it's not happening, but it's just that we have now several opportunities are in the run-up to the meeting in April that could engage also the media. Maybe one example from the last meeting was from the last time we did this, a number of countries organized field visits where they also brought in the media, brought in some people from different ministries, so then they could get a bit more exposure. And I'm thinking here that this might be something that would be useful perhaps for somebody who deals with WASH but is based in the Ministry of Finance. And then we, like I said earlier on, we're suggesting meetings between sector and finance ministers prior to the meeting, as there will not be a sector ministers meeting in Washington. So this would be a really good opportunity for the sector minister to already table some of those asks with the finance ministry. Again, depending on the budgeting cycle, this might be a good opportunity to link with the budgeting cycle. With regards commitments, we have so far commitments from 54 countries. And so for those countries that may not yet have tabled commitments, we see this as an opportunity to have the discussions with different actors, identify what those priorities are, and then table the commitments that can be shared anytime before the meeting. For those that have already tabled commitments, we see these multi-stakeholder dialogues, which will happen before the meeting, as an opportunity to review the commitments, particularly those also that we're focusing on finance, to go through those commitments and identify progress so far and where there might be gaps and how those can be strengthened. And if you do so, if you do review those commitments, please do share those reports with us. So those are some of the activities. This is really just a single slide to try and pull everything together. At the bottom of this slide, below the calendar of the months, below that calendar, these are activities that will be running at the global level, which is where the Secretariat and other partners are taking the lead. So in here we've got the webinars, the 4 webinars, one today, the next one in January, the other one in March, and then April. And then the guidance note that we will produce in January. And then the Secretariat will do the bilateral calls that I have mentioned, but we will also reach out to the different global institutions so that we can speak with them in January. We'll do bilateral calls with the constituencies. So, for example, the external support agencies and the research and learning agencies will also try and do constituency-specific phone calls with them in January. And then around about March, we anticipate to start producing the collaborative behavior country profiles. We did the first round in 2017. Again, we did the first round in 2017 before the finance ministers meeting, and we'll be doing the second round. We have a team that's doing this. We hope that by about March, we'll start having the public versions of these documents, and hopefully those can help to mobilize further discussion with the cooperating partners, and then use that for further recommendations with finance ministers. And then in April is obviously when the finance ministers meeting happen. We'll be sharing the final materials early in that month, perhaps even before, depending on when they're ready and when those discussions with the World Bank ripen. At the top of this, the calendar, the months, are the activities that we anticipate, or rather proposing for country level processes. In here, we're proposing the ongoing country multi-stakeholder dialogues, the interministerial meetings between the sector and finance minister, the national and local level advocacy activities, including the media as well. And we anticipate, or rather suggest, that the key outputs at country level would be this type of briefing that could be shared with the sector and finance minister prior to the meeting. That it depends on what type of meeting ends up happening between the sector and finance minister. It might be that they require a short presentation, so then this type of briefing can also be distilled into a presentation. And by country snapshot, I'm actually just implying that type of presentation that then can be put in front of the finance and sector minister ahead of the meeting. Now, there's more that can happen here in terms of the sector analysis, using now the just released GLASS report, and also this year we had the JMP report. So there will be several data sources that can also be used to contribute to these briefings. And in a number of countries, there've also been recent WASH bottleneck analysis, as well as other types of sector diagnostics that can also be used to look at the scope of the financing challenge, the investment history, where additional finances can come from, and the fiscal space to mobilize additional resources, say from taxes or other public resources. So this is just a summary of the national and proposed national level activities and the global level support and materials that can be anticipated. With that, I will end there. And we're very open to questions and comments, and also happy to know, particularly if you've got a process in country that might be happening soon, such as a joint sector review or a sector coordination meeting. It would be good for us to know if you have such a meeting in the horizon, so then we could see how we could maybe provide some information that can be helpful for that type of activity. Thank you very much. Siddhartha, over to you.
Thank you so much, Paul and Sitali, for the extremely insightful presentation, giving a broad overview and also highlighting the next steps which needs to be done. So the interesting point about the two presenters is that while it is 4:30 a.m. for Paul there, it's almost 11:30 p.m. for Sitali. So both have been presenting during extreme timings, and thank you so much to both of you for that. So now, before opening the floor up for questions, I will just go through the comments which are there in the chat box. Zubair has mentioned about availability of some case studies for South Asia, especially for Bangladesh, to which I think Paul has already responded. And he also mentioned about the format which needs to be used in actually to present those case studies. Sokhamuk from WaterAid Cambodia is requesting to share those case studies. He's asked. Kamran has put on a comment saying a finance minister and a staff officer. Okay, he's putting up a question asking if a finance minister and a staff officer can be supported by the secretariat. They are having 3 joint sector reviews, one planned in Pakistan before the FMM. So first we'll take up the question posed by Kamran from Pakistan, and Paul or Sitali, if you want to just respond to the question by Kamran, whether a staff can accompany the finance minister and whether the staff will be supported by the secretariat.
Sitali, maybe you could answer that question, or someone from the secretariat itself.
Yes, so thank you so much for that question, Kamran. So the finance minister is already expected to be in Washington. The World Bank spring meetings will be from somewhere around the 16th to the 20th. I think the dates on their website are 17th to 19th. So the finance minister is already anticipated to be in Washington. There have been circumstances in the past where maybe it's both the finance minister and minister of the economy or minister of planning that are relevant for this type of meeting. For such, we would then take a case-by-case basis to see in terms of what support would be available to make that person who's required to be at the meeting to actually be there at the meeting. I know that in 2017 we had maybe 2 or 3 countries in that category, but for most of the countries, the finance minister with their staff will already be in Washington during that time. Thank you.
Thank you, Sitali and Kamran. Now we will open up the floor for other questions. So if anybody has any questions or comments, please unmute your microphone and start speaking.
Siddhartha, this is Zubair.
Yeah, Zubair, please go ahead.
Yeah, good morning from Bangladesh to everyone. I think, Sitali, this is very elaborated and really very good plan and map what actually we wanted to see before April and how to go forward. One of the slides you have mentioned is the national and country level advocacy initiatives can be a good added value, or partners can initiate the advocacy meetings. I think this is very good opportunities, but it can be very useful if the partners as well as the country focus for under each and every constituencies can work together from now. So it will be very helpful to make a consensus within the national constituencies as well as the regional countries. So I just it's my opinion and sharing with you to get maybe some kind of support or push from the secretariat that how things can be linked with the partners, because so far I know it's a country level and a national level. Many joint sector reviews are continuing and discussion going on, and also some of the countries are having accountability mechanism studies. So bringing the finance ministers meetings in this issue at the country level, it would be added value within this discussions or agendas. So my submission is to the secretariat and others who are actively involved in the process may directly or periodically communicate with the regional and the country focal. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Zubair. So, Sitali, would you like to take this up?
Yes, Zubair, thank you so much for that. And just I think in terms of a quick response, you're very right. There has to be a lot of coordination, a lot of communication with the intent of bringing the partners together so that they could work together towards creating a good piece that informs the sector and finance minister, but also just to lead more systematically to longer term goals at country level. Now, what we're suggesting is that we do these bilateral calls at the beginning with the Secretariat and the various partners in each country. Ideally, these calls and these phone calls are not meant just for SIDATA to speak with the government focal point. It's for SIDATA to speak with at least each somebody, a representative from each of the constituencies on a phone call, or with all the partners. And how this has happened, one of our colleagues who's here on the call, Balvant, just yesterday he was speaking to all partners in DRC. They had a meeting and he was able to join in via the phone and to also speak with them. So it's that type of thing that we would like to do. And we will very much encourage our colleagues to let us know when they are available for that to happen, so that we can set up these discussions to also help trigger that discussion. Now, obviously, the bulk of this mobilization will have to happen at country level. The government focal point needs to do a lot in terms of bringing partners together, but we also hope that other partners can bring their resources for advocacy activities, bring their resources also with the analysis and preparations of the briefings for ministers. Thank you so much, Zubair. I will pause here as I see there are several other questions.
Thank you, Sitali and Zubair. So yeah, as Sitali said, there are a lot of questions in the chat box. But before running through the questions, I can also see a question to be posed by Paul on one of Sitali's points. Paul, do you have a question for Sitali?
Yeah, I was just wondering which one. It's a while ago in the chat box. Hold on a second. I'm just going up because there's quite a few questions. Let's have a look.
Okay.
Right. I think just to reiterate, because there's a few questions about this. This is a finance ministers meeting. So the dominant stakeholder by far are finance ministers. Yeah. There will be a small number of sector ministers in the room because we hope that case studies will be identified, limited number, as I said, maximum 4, could be less, which would be co-presented by a finance minister with his or her sector minister. So we'd expect there might be a limited number, up to 4 sector ministers in the room. And the other thing is that there would be, if you like, the representatives of each of the other SWA constituencies. It would be 1, maybe 2 if we have a room big enough to handle it. So from CSOs, from the private sector, from ESAs, from research and learning. But it depends on the size of the room. And we would like that group to participate in the dialogue. But the maximum opportunity has to be given to finance ministers to actually engage in that dialogue. I hope that answers some of the questions posed in the chat box. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Paul. Thanks for the clarification. So yeah, I think it should be able to address few of the questions which is there in the chat box. There was a question by Ananda whether a sector ministers meeting will happen. So I think it's a no. This is not a sector ministers meeting, which has been clearly clarified. Sokhadawa Chanted from Cambodia has also asked whether sector minister will be accompanied by his assistances. So like it has already been said that the number of sector ministers will be very limited, and that also depends on the number of case studies. Dr. Kwok is asking, when will the official invite letters for the finance ministers be sent? So that is something which I'll request Sitali to just give a quick answer.
Yes. So very quickly on Dr. Kuong's question, our intention is to have the save the date letters, which will be sent from the chairs, which we will send on behalf of the chair, Kevin Rudd. We intend for these letters to be out before the end of the year, so that they could be received already in the capitals before the end of the year. We requested each country to give us the details of their finance ministers. These emails went out last week, and we asked for the details of the finance ministers to be sent to us in most of the cases by December 2nd. So please, if you could send us those details, it will enable us to send the save the date letter as soon as possible. The next letter after that will be the actual invitation. That invitation, the discussions with the World Bank is that invitation will come from the World Bank as soon as the actual date and time is confirmed from their side. As Paul was saying, we're asking for 2 hours. So once they're able to slot in that into the big agenda, we anticipate then that they will send the invitations to the finance ministers. That should definitely be in 2020. And we hope that could be in the early part of the year. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sitali, for the clarification and giving us an idea about the save the date letter. We have a few questions from Therese from the UNICEF regional office. Therese is asking, this is a meeting just for the finance ministers. If the finance minister is not attending, will the sector ministers be supported? Also, if as in the past, then the finance minister confirms but then does not attend, will the sector minister be excluded from the meeting? Also, in the end, Therese has also suggested that it might be best to have World Bank sending the invitations rather than SWA. So yeah, over to you, Paul and Sitali, if you want to take up these 3 questions or comments.
Paul, so I can. Sorry, Paul, go ahead.
Well, there was one particular question from Afghanistan about the fact that in their experience, the finance minister has been too busy and the sector minister participates. The invitation will go to the finance minister. Yeah. If Afghanistan has the ability to propose a really good case study, then the sector minister, maybe, depending on the quality of the case study, would also be attending the meeting and participating in the meeting. However, I don't think we would, if you like, deliberately only be inviting the sector minister on the basis that the finance minister would not go, because that sets a precedent, and we turn the finance minister's meeting quite quickly into a sector minister's. Yeah. But
can I
also
that was Engineer Kada. I think you would like to intervene.
Yeah, Engineer Kada, go ahead.
Well, good morning to everyone from Kabul. I'm sorry I had some difficulties to join. In the comments I just put in the chat box, out of the 3 finance ministers meeting, I had the experience of 2 where the sector ministers on behalf of the finance minister at the last minute just spoke in the finance ministers meeting. So I was just wondering if that might be still, the scenario. Then I propose that we have also an invitation for the sector minister so that he should be there. But then, of course, there will be coordination. If finance minister is going to attend and speak, then that's fine. Otherwise, if he not, like the previous cases, then the sector minister can speak on behalf of the finance minister. So in the case of the cases about what have been asked to be shared, we did the same in the last finance ministers meeting. So because in that even we didn't have our sector minister, and I was the one to speak there. So that's what I just raised. So if that is possible, then we also expect an invitation for the sector minister, and I'm happy to share the details for both, of course, but then exceptionally for the sector minister too. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Engineer Kader. So these are a few practical questions which are being posed. Also coming back to Theris's specific question, if the finance minister confirms and then regrets, will the sector minister be allowed to attend? So again, we are coming back to the participation of the sector ministers and ways of involving them into this finance ministers meeting. So Sitali or Paul, if you want to just take up all these things at one go. It's all about the sector ministers' participation again.
Sitali, you'll go.
So I was going to start by just agreeing with Therese and Zobair about the invitations from the World Bank. The reason we are sending the save the date letters are that those can be done fairly quickly through our chair, Kevin Rudd. And we also would like countries to have something that informs the finance ministers early on. The World Bank cannot do it now because they have to wait until they are very certain about the specific time and date of the event. But as soon as they are aware of that, we expect that then the invitations will be sent. This is exactly what happened also in 2017. But the save the dates are more or less a stopgap measure while we wait for that process. Now, on the issue of the sector ministers, I think one thing to also just bear in mind is that the sector ministers also just met in Costa Rica this year, and so they to preserve that sort of finance ministers component. The focus now is more on the finance ministers. Now, as Paul has said, so we anticipate to have those few countries that will send sector ministers who will be presenting the case studies. Now, in that case, should the finance minister not make it, then I don't know, Paul, what the group might have discussed. I think then the fallback is that the sector minister gets to step in to present. But part of the challenge in the past has also been that because the sector minister is in town, the finance minister was very easily delegated that responsibility of attending the meeting, which somehow missed the point. But I think that the feedback is good nevertheless, and I mean, Paul, I don't know whether you've got anything additional to say about.
Well, just to say, look, so yeah, this one is a finance ministers meeting. There will be a limited number of sector ministers participating. And they will be participating because they are involved in the delivery of a TED talk, in other words, a case study. Yeah. But we would like that to be done almost certainly with the finance ministers. Beyond that, I don't think it is good practice to potentially dilute the finance minister's focus of the meeting by, if you like, deliberately inviting an additional cohort of sector ministers. That changes the tone and nature of the meeting. The meeting is there fundamentally because finance ministers will be in Washington, and we are using that. So I think the question
Can I just come in, Paul, because I agree with you, and I think it's great that the focus is on finance ministers. But for those of us now at country level and at regional level trying to access the finance ministers for the briefings, it has to be done through the sector group. And what's the advice on that? Because in the last two finance ministers meetings, I think many of us have spent hours and hours in the corridors of ministries of finance, doing briefing notes, getting everything together and getting agreement on attendance. But then when it comes to the day, there are 10 other invites for the same time. So what has been the success to date of getting finance ministers, and what's your target numbers? Because we can certainly try, but we usually end up losing an awful lot of our time, our reps' time, the country focal points time.
You broke off there. Can you hear me?
Yeah. I can hear you.
So Paul, did you miss part of anything what Therese has said? Paul, can you hear us?
Yeah, unfortunately, I only heard part of Therese's question. Therese, to answer it, I mean, firstly, absolutely, it's a challenge. I can imagine the challenge, and I've been involved sometimes in that challenge of trying to intersect with the busy agenda of finance ministers. I remember doing this in Ethiopia, for example. The way to do it, possibly, is if you're having a JSR, is to ensure that the Ministry of Finance is represented in the JSR. So you have, if you like, an entry point to the Minister of Finance's office. But the meeting will be, and in terms of the, our expectations, my first expectation is the finance ministers who actually get to the meeting participate in the meeting and stay to the end of the meeting, because they are interested to do that, and the dialogue is useful for them. In terms of actual numbers, well, I'd be very happy with 30 or 40 finance ministers. Let us simply see, basically. I'll be certainly less than happy if we only had 10 after all this effort, but I'll be really disappointed if we start with 40 and only end up with 20 in the room. Having said that, me being a minion of the state, I haven't actually been involved in a meeting itself, and I'd like maybe Sitali or whatever to comment on the numbers game, as it were, to raise.
Yes, thanks, Paul. So it was interesting to hear the range of what would be encouraging to you and also what would be disappointing. So historically, like the last meeting, we had confirmations, I think upwards of 30 to 40 ministers. I think for a number of reasons, we ended up having less than 20 in the room. We had 17 finance ministers specifically. We had several other sector ministers. But there were a lot of reasons, including exactly when that meeting was set up. It was after 5 p.m. And we think that it was after a long day, and even those that had confirmed, perhaps at that point just felt like they were not going to show up. The highest number we've had is 23 at that time. the partnership was much, much smaller. It was about 40 to 50 countries in the partnership. Now we're about 60 plus, 65, so to say. So I mean, let's see in terms of what the feasible numbers are. I think from our side too, would be aiming for around the ranges that you've mentioned. But with attrition, I think we could anticipate 30 or slightly less, so give or take a few around that number. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Paul and Sitali. I would just request everyone to keep their microphones on mute. I can hear some background sound. Kindly check your microphones and put it on mute. Okay, so coming back to one of the questions from Mohammed Mustafa from Maldives, what do we mean by candidate countries? It's on a different note, this question. So what do we mean by candidate countries? Paul?
Yeah, I didn't use the word myself. Maybe it was in Sitali's presentation. I'm assuming he is talking about countries associated with one of the 4 case studies, but maybe Sitali could clarify.
No, Paul, I think you're right. I think it was in reference to, was it Kenya and Uganda? There's potential countries that where people are aware that there's an interesting experience around the topic that will be discussed.
Okay.
Yes.
So here's my take on this. Yeah, we've already had the meeting this morning with countries in Africa, and we are already aware of interest from several African countries to get involved in the case study, kind of to prepare case studies. But if we are going to have 4 case studies, we would hope that they are also geographically representative as well. It would not be good just to have 4 case studies from Africa or 4 case studies from Asia. We would like a mix, basically. So those countries have been associated with potential case studies, but there is going to be absolutely no decision made until we've received all the potential case study kind of interest forms, and that won't be until the middle of December. And when they're reviewed, they will be reviewed by a small group of individuals who are associated with the high-level political dialogue. We would also be looking for geographical balance between Africa and Asia, and indeed Latin America. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Paul, for the clarification. So yeah, as Sitali mentioned, the highest number we had during the FMM was 23 finance ministers, and during one of the meetings, as Teres has mentioned, we had around 11, and Paul responded saying that yeah, many of them had also left because there were not many engagement opportunities. So what we are definitely trying to do this time is to ensure meaningful engagement of the finance ministers as much as possible, and to shoot up the numbers as mentioned already. Anybody else has any questions? We have reached an hour mark, and I think we should be winding this up soon. But before
can we
that,
have
if anybody else has any questions?
For the case study for all, so if somebody kindly share that would be great. Thanks.
Yeah, Engineer Ghulam, we have already shared it, I think, but I'll again share it with you, the template for the case studies. I'll share that. Anybody else has any questions, comments? Okay, then we'll move to the concluding remarks, and I'll request both Paul and Sitali to just give some quick remarks before we wind this up. Over to you, Paul. If you have any concluding remarks, specific concluding remarks. Can you hear us, Paul? Okay. Sitali?
So I would just remind people that please be on the lookout. If you could send us the details of the finance minister and the sector ministers who should be copied in that correspondence. That's one. Number two, also indicate to us when we could do the bilateral phone call starting in December. Depending on holidays, this obviously can roll into January. And then number three, be on the lookout for the guidance note towards the end of the year or early next year in January, and that leading into the preparations for the country-specific briefing note for ministers. Otherwise, thank you very much for the participation, and the next webinar will be in January. But between now and then, we will do a lot of bilateral phone calls. And so thank you so much and best wishes.
Thank you so much, Sitali. Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you so much, everyone else who have attended this webinar. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, just time to say, I'm just asking Ghulam, who from Afghanistan, who joined late. Ghulam, are you there individually, in which case we could pursue this one-to-one, or are you there with a whole team of people around you?
I'm alone actually, Paul. Thank you very much. I just noted down the three issues, the sending the details of finance minister and bilateral talks, and then I'll also see the guidelines. So I'll pass the message to the colleagues here in the sector.
Okay. If you want to have a one-to-one discussion, send me your details, and then we'll make a time later this week to have a one-to-one discussion, so I can brief you if you want.
That's great, Paul. So I'll let me see the guidance note, because I've not, and then if there are any questions specifically, then of course I will contact you and then we'll talk.
Okay, and of course if they're more about the preparation, then that can go straight to Sitali. If it's more about the design of the meeting and expectations, then it can go to me. And I've just put my work email on the chat box.
Yeah. Thank you, Paul, for offering your support. Sure. I will classify the question. Yeah.
Okay, fine. And also the other thing is to involve our regional